There is a particular kind of pain that cuts deeper than any physical wound, the pain of caring for someone who treats your existence as an afterthought. It is the agony of watching someone you value dismiss you with casual indifference, as if your presence adds nothing to their world. In these moments, most people crumble. They chase harder, beg louder, and sacrifice their dignity on the altar of someone else's attention. They become desperate performers in a play where the audience has already left the theater. But the ancient Stoics knew something that modern hearts have forgotten. They understood that the very act of chasing what runs from you is what keeps it running. They discovered that desperation repels while detachment magnetizes. They learned that the person who needs nothing from you is the one you cannot stop. Thinking about, this is not manipulation. This is the natural law of human psychology. It's predictable as gravity itself. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, he was revealing a truth that could transform your relationships forever. The emperor who commanded legions understood that the greatest battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but in the quiet chambers of our own minds. He knew that the person who masters their inner world becomes untouchable in the outer world. The path of the Stoic is not the path of the beggar. It is the path of the emperor, calm, centered, and completely self-contained. When someone does not value you, your instinct tells you to prove your worth, to convince them of your value through grand gestures and emotional displays. But the Stoic does the opposite. The Stoic withdraws, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in dignified silence. They understand that attention is the currency of the modern world, and by withholding it, they create scarcity. Seneca, the advisor to emperors, once wrote that nothing is ours except time, yet most people freely give away their most precious resource to those who do not treasure it. They spend hours crafting the perfect message. It's analyzing every word for hidden meaning, refreshing social media feeds like addicts searching for their next fix. The Stoic recognizes this as spiritual poverty. They understand that every moment spent chasing someone else's validation is a moment stolen from building their own empire. The transformation begins with a simple but profound shift in perspective. Instead of asking yourself why they do not value you, ask yourself why you are giving your value away so freely. Instead of wondering what you can do to win their attention, wonder what you can do to become so fascinating that their inattention becomes their loss, not yours. The Stoic does not change for others, they change for themselves, and in doing so, they become irresistible. There is a psychological phenomenon that governs all human relationships, though few understand its power. When something is abundant, it is taken for granted. When something is scarce, it becomes precious. Your mistake was not in caring, it was in making your care too available, too predictable, too safe. The person who does not value you has learned that you will always be there, always responding, always ready to give more than you receive. You have trained them to treat you as common when you are anything but. The Stoic path requires you to become uncommon again, not through games or manipulative tactics, but through genuine self-respect and inner development. When Epictetus, who lived as a slave before becoming one of history's greatest philosophers, taught that no one can hurt you without your permission, he was revealing the secret of unshakable confidence. The person who cannot be emotionally controlled by others becomes immediately intriguing to those who are used to having that control. Begin with your attention, the most valuable thing you possess. Notice how freely you give it away. Every time you check if they have messaged you, every time you analyze their behavior, every time you wonder what they are doing, you are bleeding your power into their world while neglecting your own. The Stoic practices what the ancients called prosouche, continuous attention to the present moment and to your own development. When you redirect that scattered attention back to yourself, something profound happens. You begin to glow with the inner light of someone who has found their center. The silence that follows is not empty, it is full of possibility. In the space where your texts used to be, where your calls used to ring, where your presence used to be guaranteed, a question mark appears. And the human mind cannot resist a question mark. We are wired to seek closure. to understand patterns, to solve puzzles. When you become a puzzle instead of an open book, you activate something primal in the other person's psychology. But this silence must be authentic, not performative. The Stoic does not withdraw to manipulate. They withdraw to reclaim their dignity and redirect their energy toward worthy pursuits. They use this time not to plot or scheme, but to become. They read books that expand their mind, pursue goals that elevate their spirit. They cultivate relationships with people who appreciate their worth. They build a life so rich and fulfilling that whether one person values them or not becomes irrelevant to their happiness. Marcus Aurelius understood that the quality of our thoughts determines the quality of our lives. While others are consumed with analyzing mixed signals and decoding cryptic messages, the Stoic is consumed with becoming the kind of person who attracts quality people naturally. They work on their character, their skills, their vision for the future. They become so busy creating value in the world that they forget to check if someone else has recognized their value. This inner work creates an external magnetism that cannot be faked. When you are genuinely engaged in meaningful pursuits, when you are growing and evolving and becoming more interesting by the day, people notice, not just the person who dismissed you, but others who recognize quality when they see it. The Stoic does not put all their eggs in one basket. They build an entire farm. Asterisk. The ancient philosophers taught that the things we can control are few, but they are the most important things. We cannot control how others perceive us, but we can control how we carry ourselves. We cannot control who values us, but we can control how we value ourselves. We cannot control the responses we receive, but we can control the energy we put out into the world. When you master these controllable elements, the uncontrollable elements often fall into place naturally. There is a moment in every relationship where the dynamic shifts. It usually happens when the person who is chasing stops chasing. Not because they no longer care, but because they have found something more interesting to chase their own potential. The person who is comfortable in their position of power suddenly finds themselves in an unfamiliar territory. The attention they took for granted is no longer available. The validation they casually dismissed is no longer offered. The presence they barely acknowledged is no longer a given. This shift creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning. When someone is used to receiving consistent attention, and it suddenly becomes unpredictable, their brain releases dopamine, not when they receive the attention, but when they anticipate it. They begin to think about you at random moments, wondering what you are doing, why you have become so distant, what has changed. The very unpredictability that once frustrated you now works in your favor. But the Stoic does not seek revenge, they seek excellence. They understand that living well is the best response to those who undervalue them. While others waste energy on resentment and spite, the Stoic channels that energy into self-improvement and personal growth. They become the person they always had the potential to be, not to prove a point, but because that is what virtue demands. Seneca wrote that every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. The end of your desperate pursuit of someone else's approval is the beginning of your journey towards self-respect. The death of your need for external validation is the birth of your inner authority. The Stoic does not mourn these endings. Celebrate them as necessary steps toward wisdom and strength. The transformation is not immediate, but it is inevitable. As you withdraw your attention from someone who does not value it and redirect it toward worthy pursuits, you begin to change. Your energy shifts from scattered to focused, from desperate to dignified, from reactive to responsive. You develop what the Stoics called ataraxian shakable calm. You become immune to the emotional turbulence that once defined your interactions. This inner peace is magnetic. People are drawn to those who have found their center, who seem unaffected by the drama and chaos that consume others. The person who once dismissed you begins to notice that you are no longer affected by their dismissal. They see that you have found something more valuable than their attention. You have found your own approval. This independence is intoxicating to those who are used to having power over others. The Stoic practices what Epictetus called the discipline of desire, learning to want what happens rather than demanding that what you want should happen. When You no longer need someone to value you. In order to value yourself, you become free. And freedom is the most attractive quality a person can possess. Suggests depth, strength, and mystery. It implies that you have access to sources of happiness that others do not understand. As weeks pass without your usual patterns of pursuit, something curious happens in the other person's mind. They begin to construct narratives about your absence. They wonder if you have found someone else, if you were never as interested as you seemed, if they misjudged your character. The human imagination is a powerful force, and in the absence of information, it creates stories. Often, these stories are more flattering than the reality ever was. The Stoic does not feed these narratives with explanations or justifications. They remain a mystery, not through calculated withholding, but through genuine engagement with their own life. They have better things to do than manage someone else's perception of them. This authentic disengagement is far more powerful than any strategy or technique because it comes from a place of real self-respect rather than wounded pride. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he was mortal, that his time was limited, that every moment was precious. This awareness of mortality creates urgency not around getting others to notice you, but around becoming who you are meant to be. The Stoic does not wait for permission to live fully. They do not postpone their happiness until someone else validates their worth. They create their own validation through virtuous action and meaningful contribution. The irony is profound. The very qualities that make you less available to someone who does not value you, self-respect, inner focus, emotional independence, are the qualities that make you more attractive to everyone else. You become like a rare book in a library, full of magazines. While others offer immediate gratification and predictable content, you offer depth, mystery, and the promise of discovering something truly valuable. The person who once overlooked you begins to see you differently, not because you have changed your fundamental nature, but because you have revealed your true nature by no longer hiding it behind desperate seeking. The confidence that comes from self-approval is qualitatively different from the confidence that comes from others' approval. It is steady, unshakable, and deeply attractive. But the Stoic does not live for this moment of recognition. They have moved beyond the need for it. They understand that whether someone values them or not says more about that person's capacity for recognition than about their own worth. They have found their validation in virtue, in growth, in contribution to the world. The opinion of someone who cannot see their value becomes irrelevant to their happiness. This is the ultimate paradox of attraction. The less you need someone to want you, the more likely they are to want you. The less you chase, the more likely you are to be pursued. The less you seek validation, the more you are likely to receive it. But by the time this happens, you no longer need it. You have found something more valuable than external approval. You've found inner approval. The Stoic path is not about winning someone back, it is about winning yourself back. It is about reclaiming your power, your dignity, your self-respect. It is about becoming the person you always had the potential to be, not for someone else's benefit, but for your own. The fact that this transformation often makes you irresistible to those who once dismissed you is simply a byproduct of becoming truly valuable rather than merely seeking to be valued. Seneca taught that we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. The fear of being alone, of being rejected, of being unloved, drives people to accept treatment that diminishes their spirit. But the Stoic knows that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. They would rather be lonely than settle for a superficial connection that requires them to betray their own worth. The person who does not value you has given you a gift, though they do not know it. They have shown you what it feels like to settle for less than you deserve. They have motivated you to become the person you always had the potential to be. They have forced you to confront your own worth and decide whether you will fight for it or surrender it. In their rejection, they have planted the seeds of your transformation. As you walk this path of dignified detachment, you will notice changes beyond just how others perceive you. You will sleep better knowing that you are no longer betraying yourself for someone else's approval. You will feel lighter, no longer carrying the weight of someone else's indifference. You will discover interests and passions that were buried under your obsession with being valued by one person. You will remember who you were before you forgot your worth. The Stoic understands that obsession is not the goal, respect is. Respect comes not from chasing, but from being worthy of being chased. It comes not from needing, but from being needed. It comes not from seeking validation, but from validating your own existence through meaningful action and virtuous living. When you become genuinely valuable, rather than merely seeking to be valued, the whole world takes notice in the end. The person who does not value you serves as a teacher, showing you the difference between conditional and unconditional self-worth. They reveal the poverty of seeking happiness in others' opinions and the richness of finding happiness in your own character. They demonstrate the weakness of emotional dependency and the strength of emotional sovereignty. They become without. Knowing it, the catalyst for your transformation from someone who needs to be loved to someone who deserves to be loved. The Stoic does not seek to make anyone obsessed with them. They seek to become so fascinating, so centered, so valuable, that obsession becomes the natural response of those who encounter them. They understand that true power does not announce itself, it is recognized by its silence. When you value yourself, above all, you become rare. And in a world that ignores depth, rarity becomes obsession. True power does not beg to be noticed, is noticed by its silence.